It's the morning of Eid el-Kabir, one of the most sacred days on the Muslim calendar. There is a smell of roasting meat in the air, the sound of families gathering, and quiet rhythm of prayer. It is supposed to be a moment of peace, but inside the Ikeja cantonment, the atmosphere is heavy with something else. Two men are kneeling side by side in the dust of the prayer ground. They have served together for years. They are more than just colleagues. They are friends. On one side is Lieutenant Colonel Sabo Aliyu. He is the commander of the Brigade of Guards. His entire world is built on the single elite mission: protect the head of state with his life. On the other side is Lieutenant Colonel Halilu Akilu. He is the director of military intelligence. In a country defined by its military strength, Akilu is the man who sees everything. Sabo is uneasy. For days, he's been hearing whispers in the barracks, rumors of shadows moving where they shouldn't be, and troop movements that don't show up on any official schedule. As the prayers come to an end, Sabo leans in. He looks at his friend and asks the question that's been keeping him awake at night. Is something happening? Akilu doesn't hesitate. He doesn't flinch. He looks Sabo straight in the eye and says, "It's been investigated. There is nothing to fear." 12 hours later, that friendship is dead. The silence of the night is shattered by gunfire. At the gates of Ikeja cantonment, soldiers open fire on their Mercedes. Sabo and Buhari's aide-de-camp, Major Mustafa Jokolo, are dragged from the wreck, violently beaten and stripped of the uniforms they spent their lives earning. The man who told him there was nothing to fear wasn't just lying. He had been part of this conspiracy for months. But what would have gone wrong in just 20 months to warrant another coup in Africa's most populous nation? In 1980, Nigeria felt untouchable. It was a giant of Africa, and for a moment, it looked like it was actually going to live up to the name. Oil was peaking at $40 a barrel. The government was pulling in nearly $25 billion a year. They were building everything all at once. There were massive highways, sprawling universities. This wasn't just the most populous nation in Africa anymore. It was supposed to be the wealthiest one. And then the floor fell out. The price of oil fell off a cliff. By 1983, revenue dried up. Meanwhile, the national debt exploded overnight. Across the country, the gears of daily life just stopped. In some states, teachers, doctors, and civil servants went months without a single paycheck. But the men at the very top weren't feeling the squeeze. They were busy. They were pocketing everything that wasn't bolted to the floor. Public offices became private bank accounts. Import licenses, the right to bring goods into the country, were handed out like party favors to loyalists. Contracts were written up to several times what they actually cost, and many of those projects were never even started. The ruling party had essentially turned the entire government into a massive money printing machine for its inner circle. And whenever investigators started getting too close, whenever the auditors arrived to look at the books, the evidence burned. Mysterious fires started breaking out at government buildings all across the country. Nobody was ever charged, not for the theft and certainly not for the arson. By December 1983, the air was thick with tension. The National Security Organization knew the clock was ticking. They were tracking multiple overlapping coup plots, moving through the military like a virus. The civilian government was too weak and too dirty to stop any of them. The question then wasn't if the military would take over. The only question was which group of officers would strike first. December 31st, 1983, New Year's Eve. Across Lagos, people were counting down. From the high-end bars of Victoria Island to the crowded market stalls of Mushin. There is a shared, desperate hope that 1984 will be better than the year they are leaving behind. They are looking for a fresh start. They have no idea that at 2:30 a.m., while the celebrations are still winding down, the country is already being taken away from them. The man who planned the whole thing is a 42-year-old Major General named Ibrahim Babangida. He had been setting the stage for months. He had the money, funded by one of Nigeria's wealthiest businessmen, MKO Abiola. He had the guns, controlled by Brigadier Sani Abacha, and he had the secrets, managed by the head of military intelligence, Aliyu Muhammad Gusau. But Babangida doesn't want the big chair, not yet. He needs a frontman, someone the public will trust, someone with a reputation for being so honest it hurts. He finds his man 700 kilometers away in Jos, a man named Major General Muhammadu Buhari. At 2:30 a.m., the lights go out. Troops move into position simultaneously across the country. Roadblocks go up. Radio stations are seized, international phone lines are cut, and the airports are sealed shut. Nigeria is suddenly an island. But things quickly go sideways. Brigadier Ibrahim Bako arrives to arrest the president, believing the presidential guards have already agreed to stand down. Well, they haven't. The coup plan had leaked, the guards are waiting, a firefight breaks out in the dark, and Bako is killed in his truck. President Shagari is spirited away to safety, but the walls are closing in. He eventually surrenders. Before dawn, the takeover is official. Brigadier Sani Abacha walks into the federal radio station and announces the coup. He suspends the constitution, he dissolves the government, he bans political parties and locks the country down under a curfew. Hours later, Muhammadu Buhari is declared the head of state. The world watched with a shrug. In fact, Time magazine reported that Nigerians seemed to accept the news, figuring things couldn't possibly get any worse. But no one asked the most important question. If Babangida planned the coup and gave Buhari the presidency, what exactly did Babangida keep for himself? On the surface, it looks like any other military takeover. But right from day one, a structure emerges that Nigeria has never seen before. In every other regime, there is a leader and there is a deputy. But this administration becomes something entirely different. It is co-branded. In the markets, in the newspapers, and in the halls of foreign embassies. People don't just call it the Buhari government, they call it the Buhari Idiagbon regime. Major General Tunde Idiagbon is the man in the second chair. He's a soldier's soldier, disciplined and famously unsmiling. His career runs parallel to Buhari's. They entered the army in the same year, fought in the same wars, served in the same military governments, and they shared the same cold temperament. Buhari doesn't just trust him, he hands him the keys to the kingdom. Suddenly, Idiagbon becomes the face of the regime's muscle. He is the one signing the detention orders that send security risks to prison without a trial. He's the one running the war against indiscipline. By all accounts, he holds more raw power than any deputy in the history of the nation. But if you look closely at the table, sitting quietly in the third chair is Ibrahim Babangida. You see, while Buhari and Idiagbon are busy running the country, Babangida is busy running the army. He decides who gets promoted. He decides which colonel gets moved to which border. He decides who commands the battalions with the most tanks. Buhari controls the government. Idiagbon controls the laws, but Babangida controls the men with the guns. And he's not just moving troops, he's placing his people in the spots where they can be useful to him months from now. But nobody notices, at least not yet. Everyone is staring at Buhari and Idiagbon, and the duo is about to give the world something truly unforgettable.
I want you to bear in mind the need to emphasize self-discipline and leadership by good example.
March 20th, 1984, in Lagos, Nigeria. This is the day Idiagbon announces the campaign that will define the regime. It is called the War Against Indiscipline. Phase 1 is queue culture. For the first time, soldiers are deployed to every bus stop, every bank, and every market in the country. Their job is to make sure people wait their turn. But they aren't just there to point the way. They are carrying horsewhips. It's a surreal image. A uniformed soldier, rifle slung over his shoulder, standing over a crowd of civilians to make sure they are standing in a straight line at the bus stop. And then there is phase 2, work ethics. The rules are absolute. If you are a civil servant and you show up late for work, you aren't just given a warning. You are forced to perform frog jumps in the parking lot while soldiers watch. If you are a student over 17 caught cheating on an exam, you are looking at 21 years in prison. The age of extravagance, the era of the big man spending government money is officially over. The cabinet is slashed. The belts are tightened. But behind the orderly queues and the public humiliations, something much darker is happening. By the end of 1984, the regime has locked up governors, ministers, businessmen. Anyone who held power in the previous administration is now a target. But as the cells fill up, a pattern starts to emerge. A pattern that has nothing to do with how much money was stolen and everything to do with who you are. Now, look at the two men who were at the very top of the old government. On one hand, you have President Shehu Shagari. He was the man in charge while the country was being looted. But Shagari isn't in a holding cell. He's been held in a government guest house in Ikoyi, Lagos. He is unharmed. Eventually, he will be released without ever being charged. But on the other hand, you have his vice president, Dr. Alex Ekweme. Ekweme is a Southern Christian, and while the president is being held in a guest house, the vice president is thrown into the Kirikiri maximum security prison. The war against corruption, it seemed, had a compass and it pointed south. Although defenders of the regime would later argue that the differential treatment was a matter of rank and not tribe, but the numbers told a different story. In April 1984, Buhari decides to stop chasing the thieves and start chasing the money. He decides to swap the national currency. And he did this overnight. Every single banknote in the country is being replaced. New colors, new designs, and most importantly, a brutal razor-thin deadline. Once that clock hits zero, the old money isn't just old, it is worthless paper. And the logic for this was devastatingly simple. If you were a corrupt official sitting on a mountain of stolen cash in a hidden safe, under a mattress, or stashed in a house in London, you had just one choice. You could try to exchange it and explain exactly where it came from, or you could watch your wealth evaporate into thin air. But this wasn't a standard policy move. It was a ghost operation. Buhari didn't tell the full Supreme Military Council. He kept the circle tiny, just a few trusted officers. The new notes were printed abroad and flown in on Air Force planes. It was a clandestine military strike, masquerading as fiscal policy, and it affected the lives of over 80 million people overnight. And it worked. A massive chunk of the country's circulating cash simply vanished. Money that couldn't be explained, couldn't be exchanged. It was an extraordinary act of economic warfare. But then, at the very height of this war, a single event at the airport cracked the regime's credibility wide open. Murtala Mohammed Airport was supposed to be a fortress. To prevent people from smuggling old cash back into the country to beat the deadline, every single bag entering Nigeria was to be searched thoroughly, no exceptions. However, weeks after the currency swap, with border inspections still in force, 53 suitcases arrived at the VIP section, but they didn't stop for inspection. The luggage allegedly belongs to the Emir of Gwandu. He is the father of Major Mustapha Jokolo, Buhari's aide-de-camp. The man in charge of customs at the time was a young man named Atiku Abubakar. He wasn't there that day. It was a weekend, but his officers were. They tried to do their jobs, but soldiers stopped them. What was inside those 53 suitcases? To this day, nobody knows, but for the Nigerian public, the contents didn't actually matter. The image was enough. The man who had forced over 80 million people to wait in lines, the man who was burning the savings of corrupt politicians, couldn't or wouldn't stop his own inner circle from wheeling 53 uninspected suitcases through his own blockade. This was a PR disaster, but it was more than that. It was a first sign that the regime's iron discipline had a blind spot. Buhari was learning that fighting corruption inside Nigeria was a street fight, but he was about to find out that the real battle was happening on the global stage, against the institutions that actually controlled Nigeria's survival. While Buhari was cleaning house at home, the real mess was thousands of miles away, in the offices of the IMF in Washington and the quiet boardrooms of the Paris Club. By 1984, Nigeria was drowning. The national debt had exploded to nearly $18 billion. The country was spending a huge amount of money just to pay the interest on its debt. Their savings were gone. Nigeria was essentially running on fumes with barely enough cash to cover imports. And so the IMF came in with a check for roughly $2 billion. But it wasn't a gift, it was a deal with strings attached. They wanted Nigeria to devalue its currency, the naira, by 60%. They wanted the government to stop subsidizing fuel. They wanted something called trade liberalization, which is a fancy way of saying open your doors to the world. Let foreign companies come and compete with your cash-strapped local businesses. To the bankers in Washington, this was just standard economic medicine. But to Buhari, it looked like a surrender of Nigeria's pride. He knew exactly what a 60% devaluation would do. It wouldn't hurt the politicians who had stashed their stolen billions in London. It would hit the market women, the teachers, the families already struggling to buy bread. Overnight, food and medicine would become luxuries they couldn't afford. And so Buhari walked away from the deal. He decided he would fix the economy on his own terms, through sheer uncompromising force. He slashed the government's deficit. He imposed a regime of austerity that was so tight it actually worked on paper. But there was a hidden human cost to this. You see, because he was obsessed with saving foreign cash, he restricted what could be brought into the country. Essential goods started vanishing from store shelves. Inflation was running wild, and because he didn't have the blessing of the IMF or the banks in Washington, international lenders refused to help Nigeria manage its debt. They were basically trying to suffocate the regime into submission. The message from the global system was clear: play by our rules or you play alone. And so Buhari chose to play alone. He turned to something called counter trade. It was a massive high-stakes game of international barter. He started trading Nigerian oil directly for goods, bypassing the US dollar and the entire global banking system. He traded oil to Brazil for machinery. He set up a military-run distribution system for something called essential commodities. Things like sugar, milk, salt, these are called Esenco. And then he went a step further. To stop people from smuggling wealth out of the country, he slammed the borders shut. He locked the gates to Benin, Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. It stopped the thieves, but it also cut off the food supply for the entire region. In eastern Niger, a drought-stricken population faced a famine so brutal they didn't blame the weather. They named the starvation after the man they held responsible for it, El Buhari. The pressure was everywhere. The US wanted the borders open, France wanted them open, but Buhari said no. He was fighting everyone at once: the global banks, his neighbors, and the elite back at home. He was a man surrounded by enemies he had made on principle. But With the stolen billions still sitting untouched in London bank accounts and every legal door slammed in his face, the regime was about to try something truly desperate. It was a plot so devious that it led to a scandal that would nearly destroy Nigeria's relationship with the British Crown forever.
Witnesses have told the police that as he left his house, Mr. Dicker was grabbed by two black men and bundled into the back of a yellow transit vehicle.
The name at the top of the regime's most wanted list is someone called Muhammadu. He wasn't just a politician, he was the architect of the old power structure, the man who controlled the country's rice supply, and according to the new regime, the man accused of walking away with over $1 billion. Dicko didn't wait around to see what the soldiers would do to him. On the very day of the coup, which also happened to be his 47th birthday, he fled. He slipped across the border to Benin, moved through Togo, and eventually surfaced in London. He didn't just hide though. He settled into a comfortable life in the wealthy neighborhood of Bayswater and started appearing on British television calling out the generals back in Lagos. For Buhari and Idiagbon, this was a slap in the face. They were convinced Dicko held the keys to the offshore accounts where the nation's wealth was hidden. But there was a problem. Britain wasn't going to give him back. As far as the UK was concerned, Dicko was a political exile and diplomatic channels were a dead end. And so the regime decided to stop playing by the rules. But the plot for the most infamous intelligence operation in Nigerian history didn't start in a high-tech war room. It started in a prison cell. You see, inside the Kirikiri maximum security prison, a German businessman named Klaus Simot was being held. He had a proposition for his captors. He knew people, Israelis, specifically operatives who could do what Nigerian intelligence could not. And so a marriage of convenience was born. The operation was a joint effort. On the Israeli side, Mossad Director General Nahum Admoni oversaw the mission. On the ground, ex-Nigerian Army Major Mohammed Yusufu led the Nigerian team. The Israelis included Alexander Barak and Felix Abitbo. They moved into London and began a relentless hunt. By June 30, 1984, they found him. An operative spotted Dicko walking near Queensway and followed him back to his front door at 49 Porchester Terrace. By early July, the trap was set. A Nigerian Airways Boeing 707 touched down at Stansted Airport. The crew claimed they were there to pick up diplomatic baggage. Meanwhile, in a London hotel room, a man named Dr. Levi Ari Shapiro was checking his medical kit. Shapiro wasn't just a doctor. He was a top-tier anesthetist and the director of the intensive care unit at Hasharon Hospital in Israel. His job was chillingly specific: to drug Umaru Dicko, insert a breathing tube to keep him from choking on his own vomit, and keep him alive inside a wooden crate all the way back to Lagos. Everything was in place. The plane was fueled. The doctor was ready. The crates were built and waiting. All they needed now was for Dicko to step outside. Lunchtime, Bayswater, July 5th, 1984. Umaru Dicko steps out of his home at 49 Porchester Terrace. He thinks he's safe in London. He's wrong. Within seconds, two men grab him. He's hauled into the back of a yellow van. A massive man sits on his head to keep him down. There are handcuffs. There are chains. But this isn't just a kidnapping by thugs. This is a surgical operation. Inside the van, Dr. Shapiro goes to work. He administers a powerful anesthetic. He hooks Dicko up to an ECG monitor. He slides a tube down his throat to make sure he doesn't choke while he's out. Dicko, who is now shirtless and unconscious and wired to medical monitors, is then placed inside crate number 1. Dr. Shapiro climbs in right next to him to monitor his vitals for the next 6-hour flight back to Lagos. In crate number 2, two more operatives, Alexander Barak and Felix Abitbo, climb in and are sealed shut. The crates are labeled diplomatic baggage. They are addressed to the Nigerian Ministry of External Affairs. Now, under international law, diplomatic bags are sacred. They are not supposed to be opened. But the kidnappers made one mistake. Dicko's secretary had seen the whole thing from a window. She didn't panic. She called the police. Within minutes, an all-ports bulletin was flashing on screens all across every exit point in Britain. By mid-afternoon, a van pulls into the cargo terminal at Stansted Airport. The crates are wheeled toward a waiting Nigerian Airways 707. This is where a British customs officer named Charles David Morrow changes history. He's told the cargo is diplomatic. He's told he can't touch it. But Morrow has seen the bulletin. He looks at these two massive wooden boxes and he notices something strange. They have air holes. He could see the space. It was clearly big enough for a human being. And so he walks closer. He doesn't just see the crates now, he smells them. He catches the sharp, sweet scent of medical anesthetic. He hears a rustle from inside. Morrow doesn't argue with the Nigerian officials. His colleague Peter grabs a forklift and parks it across the top of the crate so it can't be opened. And then Morrow dials the police. The Nigerian intelligence officer on the scene, Major Yusufu, is frantic. He's screaming about diplomatic immunity. He is waving paperwork, but Morrow has spotted the fatal flaw. The crates aren't properly sealed with the official stamp of the Nigerian government. Technically, they aren't diplomatic bags at all. Soon enough, armed police pry the lids open. In crate 1, they find a shirtless, drugged Umaru Dicko, wired to a heart monitor like a patient in an ICU. Beside him, Dr. Shapiro looks up, wide awake. And in crate 2, they find the other operatives. The fallout is an international earthquake. Diplomatic relations between Nigeria and the UK are shattered. Diplomats are expelled. In fact, the CEO of Nigerian Airways was almost arrested by British police for 2 years. The two countries stopped talking entirely. The kidnappers are sent to prison. Umaru Dicko stays in London, free and untouchable. The regime that came to power promising to recover Nigeria's stolen billions had just learned the hardest lesson of international politics. Once the money leaves your borders, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the system that protects it. London's banks, Britain's courts, and the diplomatic rules that shield the powerful. None of it was built for Nigeria. It was built to keep the money exactly where it was. This time, it was London.
I believe that the British government and the British people will not support illegality. Whatever the military junta in Nigeria would want to do, the jurisdiction does not extend to Britain.
While the Dicko affair was exploding on the world stage, the regime was busy fighting a different kind of war at home. Anyone and everyone was a target. It all started with something called Decree Number 4. It was a gag order. It stated that if you published anything that brought the government or a public official into ridicule, you were a criminal. It didn't matter if what you wrote was mostly true. Under Decree Number 4, if the government felt embarrassed, accuracy was no shield. You were going to jail. On July 4, 1984, two journalists from The Guardian, Tunde Thompson and Nduka Irabo, found out exactly what that meant. They were sentenced to 2 years in prison for a report on diplomatic postings. But if Decree Number 4 was meant to silence the thinkers, Decree 20 was meant to kill the desperate. Decree 20 made drug trafficking a capital offense, punishable by death by firing squad. But here's the terrifying part. The law was retroactive. On April 10, 1985, 3 young men, Bartholomew Owo, Lawa Oduolape, and Bernard Ogedengbe, were led out to a shooting range near Kirikiri prison. When they were originally arrested, their crime carried a prison sentence. But while they were sitting in their cells, the government simply changed the rules. They were being executed for a law that didn't even exist when they were caught. But Buhari didn't blink. He said he would do it again. His next move was dragging the old political elite before military tribunals. Nearly 500 politicians and officials were dragged before military tribunals. Some were handed sentences so absurd they sounded like fiction. In fact, one man got 211 years in prison. But the justice was inconsistent. When Chief Adekunle Ajasin was acquitted by the tribunal, the regime didn't like the verdict, and so they ordered a second trial. He was acquitted again, and yet he wasn't allowed to go home. He was thrown back into indefinite detention. And then they went after the soul of the nation, Fela Kuti. The legendary musician was arrested at the airport for carrying 1,600 pounds, money he needed for a US tour. They gave him 5 years. Buhari was fighting a war on two fronts. He was crushing what he called corruption with one hand and crushing the spirit of the country with the other. He was jailing journalists for telling the truth, executing men with ghost laws, and putting the country's biggest cultural icon in a cage. And through all of this, the man who had handpicked Buhari for the job was still there. Major General Ibrahim Babangida sat 3 seats away at council meetings. He watched the executions. He watched the arrests. He watched the public's growing resentment. He was smiling. He was patient, and he was finally ready to move. From the very first day the Supreme Military Council was sworn in, Ibrahim Babangida was busy building a network. As the Chief of Army Staff, Babangida sat on top of the only resource that actually mattered in Nigeria: people. He controlled every promotion. He decided who got the prestigious postings in the city and who was sent to the quiet, forgotten provinces. And over 20 months, he used that power to place his boys, known as the IBB boys, at every single choke point in the country. He placed Sani Abacha, the regime's most ruthless enforcer, at the 2nd Mechanized Division in Ibadan. That's just one straight highway away from the capital. And then he made David Mark the governor of Niger State. This was Babangida's home turf, creating what became known as the Mina Axis. It was a safe zone, a place where his inner circle could meet and plan far away from the prying eyes of Idiagbon spies. Node by node, Babangida was weaving a parallel command structure inside the government. It was a ghost army that lived inside the official one, ready to move while the rest of the chain of command was fast asleep. But in early 1985, the men at the top started to push back. Buhari and Idiagbon weren't blind. They moved against Babangida's inner circle, targeting his closest confidant, the intelligence chief, Aliyu Muhammad Gusau. They tried to force him into retirement over a business scandal. It was a shot across the bow, and Babangida knew exactly what it meant. If they could strip away his eyes and ears, his own neck was next on the block. And so Babangida started talking directly to the troops. When Buhari suggested cutting the military budget to save the economy, Babangida didn't just disagree in private, he went public. He was sending a clear signal to every soldier who was worried about a pay cut. The guys in the big office want to take your money. I'm the one who wants to keep it in your pocket. By July 1985, the plan entered its final phase. Under the cover of the Chief of Army Staff Conference on Economic Development in Minna, the plotters met at the Shiroro Hotel. The logistics were coordinated from the barracks in Lagos to the Shiroro Hotel in Minna, where one of the invited civilians was the billionaire MKO Abiola. Back in Lagos at the Ikeja barracks, armored vehicles were being gathered for what was called a minor exercise. For an entire week, those tanks sat on standby, their engines idling in the heavy tropical heat. The network was built, the loyalists were locked in, the tanks were fueled. Ibrahim Babangida had everything he needed. Now, he just had to wait for Tunde Ijagbon to leave the country. But the warnings were there. People tried to tell the men at the top that the floor was about to give way. At least 3 former heads of Nigeria's intelligence services would later confirm that they knew Babangida was planning a coup, but none of them told Buhari. They claimed he was inaccessible and Idiagbon was overbearing. When the rumors reached Idiagbon himself, he dismissed them, saying, "Let them try." It was the response of a man convinced that the military was still under his thumb. In the final weeks, Buhari confronts Babangida face to face in his office. Years later, Buhari remembered the conversation. He said, quote, "I called him Ibro because I was just senior to him by a few months. I said, whoever wants to sit on this chair, let him come and sit here." It was a dare, a challenge from a man who believed that his moral authority was enough to stop a tank. Babangida looked him in the eye and then he decided to do it. In mid-August, the last line of defense vanished. Tunde Idiagbon boarded a plane for Saudi Arabia. He was going on the Hajj. He left Buhari alone in the fortified heart of Lagos, surrounded by men who had already chosen sides. Eid el-Kabir, at the mosque inside Ikeja cantonment. The air is thick with the heat of a Lagos morning and the quiet murmur of thousands of voices. Two men, Sabo Aliyu and Halilu Akilu, are kneeling side by side in the dust. To anyone watching, they are just two high-ranking officers performing a holy rite. But in reality, they represent the two halves of a fractured state. Sabo is the commander of the elite guard, the man whose entire life is dedicated to keeping the head of state alive. Akilu, on the other hand, is the director of military intelligence and the silent engine of a coup that is now only hours away. Sabo asks the question. He's been hearing the whispers. He has seen the shadows. He looks at his friend and asks if the center is still holding. And Akilu replies, quote, "There is nothing to fear." Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Saudi Arabia, Tunde Idiagbon is performing the Hajj. He's praying alongside the Saudi king himself, a guest of the kingdom, utterly unaware that the country he left behind is about to be stolen from under him. Ibrahim Babangida is officially celebrating the holiday. Unofficially, he is waiting for the signal. In Ibadan, Sani Abacha has the 2nd Mechanized Division on standby. His troops are ready to move the moment the order comes in. And at Ikeja cantonment, those armored vehicles that have been idling in the heat for days are finally beginning to move. Military intelligence has put out a cover story, a false report that Colonel Aliyu Mohammed, furious about his forced retirement, is plotting unrest. It is a convenient lie, a smokescreen to justify the troop movements without raising alarms. It is a masterpiece of deception. As the sun begins to set over Lagos on August 26th, a strange, total silence falls over Dodan Barracks. Sabo Aliyu goes home. He believes the rumors have been investigated. He believes the country is stable. He believes the man he just prayed with. Well, he is wrong. It is 9 o'clock. Across Lagos, the Salah celebrations are finally winding down. The music is quieter. The streets are starting to empty and the heavy August humidity is settling over the city. Two men are driving toward Ikeja cantonment. Major Jokolo, the president's right-hand man and the commander of the Guards Brigade. They have heard reports that things are moving in the barracks that shouldn't be moving. They are going to investigate. They still think they are the ones in charge here. Well, they are not. As their Mercedes reaches the cantonment gate, the world explodes. Majors John Madaki and Maxwell Kobe, men who should be taking orders from them, suddenly open fire. The tires are shredded, the car grinds to a halt. Jokolo and Sabo Aliyu are dragged out, beaten and stripped. They are thrown into the back of a truck in their underwear and driven to Bonny Camp. The president's shield has been shattered. What follows is a takeover so smooth it barely makes a sound. Armored vehicles from Ikeja cantonment begin to move. Troops take up positions across the city, but there is almost no resistance here. This isn't a revolution from the outside, it is a betrayal from within. On the evening of August 26th, 4 officers arrive at the presidential residence at Dodam Barracks. Majors Abubakar Umar, Lawan Gwadabe, Abdul Mumin Amino, and Sambo Dasuki. They are not strangers in the palace. These are Buhari's own men. Inside, Muhammadu Buhari is remarkably calm. He has watched the tanks arrive. He knows exactly what is happening. He turns to the few guards he has left and gives one final order. Do not interfere. He puts on his official uniform. He waits. The head of state is escorted out of his home and driven away to his cell. At 6 a.m. on Tuesday, August 27th, the radio turns on. Colonel Joshua Dogoyaro is at the microphone in the Ikoyi studios. It is the exact same room where the last coup was announced 20 months ago. Even the young officer on duty, Peter Odoba, is the same. For the second time in less than 2 years, he is told not to resist, and for the second time he doesn't. Dongoyaro tells the nation that a small group of individuals in the Supreme Military Council had abused their power and failed to listen to the advice of their colleagues. He announces that the regime of Major General Muhammadu Buhari has been deposed. By 1 in the afternoon, the cycle is complete. Sani Abacha, the same voice that announced Buhari's rise to power, now announces his removal. The new man in the chair is Major General Ibrahim Babangida. At Bonny Camp, the atmosphere is festive. Champagne bottles are popped. The radio is buzzing with voices from every division in the country, all pledging their loyalty to the new leader. A plane is already in the air, heading to Mina to collect Babangida and bring him to his new palace. It had been 20 months. 500 people had been jailed, 3 had been executed, 1 had been shoved into a crate. The currency had been swapped overnight. The world's biggest banks had been defied, journalists had been arrested, imprisoned, and the country's biggest star had been put in a cell. In the end, 20 months was all it took for the men who put Buhari in power to decide he was now a liability. And now, they had the difficult job of doing the cleanup.
I'm pleased to take this opportunity to declare once again, therefore, that this administration attaches the greatest importance to constructive and helpful criticisms as well as the freedom of the press, and to declare further that the administration also attaches the greatest importance of fundamental human rights.